good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another video by SKippy. Hi, just a quick update on the canopy. As was suggested by one of the guys viewing, Robert Shimori, thank you very much for the suggestion. He said, why don't I try and make it in two parts, this canopy, and then that might make it easier to shape. So when I got home from work this afternoon, I gave that a go. As you can see, no obvious holes in the front canopy. And what I've done is I've then cut the canopy that I'd done previously and glued the two together. I think that's brilliant. Much easier, much neater, and then the two halves, well, the two parts are stuck together using CA glue. So yeah, brilliant, Rob. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just fiddling around with the second canopy, and I was looking at putting the armour plate in the back there. It's not glued on yet, and then it is obvious that actually that gap for the second cockpit is a lot smaller than the front. I think the front is about 1.5 inches. This is probably only 1 inch. So what I really need to do is work out a way of cutting this back, just to give more space, to give that, you know, that view of what the second cockpit looks like, and then move the plate further back as well, which actually bring it better in line with the rear of the canopy. Much like on the real aeroplane, I'm going to show a picture here. You can see it's a lot closer, and obviously the space is bigger. So I'm going to give that a go. So what I'm going to do is cut centimetre probably of this down to this stringer here, same on the other side, and make a plate that will then just glue against the 4 stringers and the top spar. Well, there we go. Cut the part out, stuck another piece in. To be fair, it looks a lot better for the size anyway. I may just put a blank plate over the top so you can't see in. But yeah, actually I'm glad I did that now. That wasn't too stressful. Seems to have worked well. Just gives it a bit better proportion. Right, making the battery hatch using the parts that I'd cut out and trimmed down. I've used the greaseproof paper, stuck it over where the hatch will be, pinned down the 2 base plates, and I've glued all the other pieces onto it, pinned it in place just so it doesn't move. I'm going to let that set nice and properly. It's now bedtime, so in the morning I'm going to take it off, put the stringers on. I'm going to sand it just to make sure that it fits neatly where it joins the other surfaces, and then probably use magnets, a couple of cocktail sticks to hold it in place, but I'll get to that tomorrow. I've removed the main hatch from the model. See, it fits quite nicely in there. Giving it a quick rough sanding over. This time, if I can focus it, I've actually sanded so I won't have that weird knobbly bit at the back side when you look at it. I still need to sand it down. What I'll do now is I'll fit the stringers, give it a bit more rigidity. I can give it a bit of better sanding down to make it fit nicer, same as at the front here. And then I'll look at putting in the magnets, maybe 1 or 2, and maybe a cocktail stick just to fix it in place. Here we have the battery hatch complete. Stringers on, fits nicely, not too tight. I've sanded down the ends so that it all fits in neatly, and this time round no unsightly humps as you look down the fuselage, so much happy with that. So now just to work on the fixings, probably going to have a peg one side with a magnet, and then the opposite side a magnet and a peg, so that I can lift it off and it's not too strong, but the pegs help fix it in place. Main fuselage is nearly complete build wise. Built the hatch, just need to finish and put the magnets in. I've left this piece clear at the moment and the forward cockpit so that I can put the receiver in, and I'll cover that all once I have built the wing. And what I want to do really is install the stabiliser and rudder so that I can then put the push rods through the formers, and then I can bend the push rod out at this point. And what I'll probably do is put a thin piece of balsa in there to be the final guide, and then I can paper it. So I've glued the aileron in using some thin CA. I've got the centre line of the stabiliser so that I can run it down inside the actual fuselage build. But what I'm not going to do this time is apply CA glue to the stabiliser. before I put it in. I did that last time and it dried halfway through before I got it in position, which was a nightmare. This time I'm going to put it in position and then I'm going to run CA glue along the edges to fix it in place. I'll then do the same or similar with the rudder. To make sure I've got the stabilizer even on both sides, I'm measuring from this point to that point, there to there, and they should both be the same. I'll show a photo of that measurement. I've preformed the push rods. This one here is for the elevator, this one here is for the rudder. Once I did that, I have then, if I can zoom in, I've stuck some masking tape over the two stringers there to form a bit more rigidity under the tissue paper, so that when the wire goes through it's less likely to rip the paper. Same on the other side. A top tip, if you're going to follow me on this build, it's probably easier to put the tissue paper over the top of the fuselage before sticking the rudder on, rather than the way I've done it is stick the rudder on then try and paste the tissue paper in. Doesn't look too tidy at the moment, but obviously as I tidy it up it'll look better. For those of you that have got a keen eye, this is a slightly different shaped rudder now. What I noticed once I put it on the airframe, there's a bit of a bulb here, a bulbous piece there, so I've cut it down to give it a bit of a smarter straight line, more like the real thing. It wasn't until I looked at the photo when I was messing around earlier that I realised it just didn't look right, so that hopefully, well, to me does look a bit better, and hopefully to the rest of you that'll look better too. So the rudder, tail, elevator, rear stabilizer all fitted now. Just need to wait for this to dry properly, then I will install the push rods and arms. This evening, successful parts. Installed the push rods for the elevator and rudder. You can see there. I haven't tightened them in there yet. I'll do that once I've tidied up the tissue paper, make sure everything moves, and I'll also plug it into the receiver to make sure that it is centered. I've also now completed the hatch, put 2 magnets in and 2 little locating toothpicks. So now when I turn it the right way around and drop it on, you get a nice click, and that's not going to go anywhere. There you go. Nice and neat. So tomorrow start covering the rest of the aircraft fuselage. I've rebound the new transmitter I'm actually going to use in this model, and when I was doing so I also made sure that the elevator and rudder servos were centered. Now that I know they're centered and everything's lined up at the rear, I put a little bit of thread lock on there to stop those screws coming loose, because once they're on they'll be a lot more tricky to get access to. Now that I've done that, and I created the hatch yesterday in the attachments, I'm now going to start papering the fuselage, just leaving this bit at the front till last once I've built the wing, so that I can then get easier access to fit the receiver in, before finally finishing it. Right, that's the fuselage covered for now. I'll do this top section once I've built the wing, covered the wing and glued it in, because I'll then need to fit the receiver in and sort the wires out, so I want to give myself some easier access into that part. It's all nice and neat. Doesn't look too bad actually, so it may not need much stretching. What I'm also going to do is, in here there's I'm going to put a hatch over the top, not a hatch but a cover, so that this is just solid. Just make it look a bit neater, but I will leave the cockpit open so that I can get to the servos if necessary. So yeah, fuselage done for now. Shrink the tissue paper down tomorrow and I can get on building with the wing. While I was waiting for the tissue to dry on the fuselage, I thought I'd do the decals for this aircraft. Obviously trying to work out where I get the Bremont and Aero Collective bit from. That font there on the tail around the roundel isn't a standard font from what I can tell, nor is the stencil font. So I've tried to do as close as I can. So what I've done on Word and a bit of cut and paste with PowerPoint as well, created these stencils, or these decals, sorry. So that's the best stencil I could find. subtle difference here on the real one is the P is broken into 3 parts, this is only 2. The Bremont Collective, managed to get those off Google, then with a bit of cut and paste, etc. Get those on the right background so that the white will show up hopefully so I can print it. The font, I've used a World War II font, and then to get the 5 and the R, what I did is I cut and paste basically, so I cut halfway across the 5 and the R, and I put a white box over it, and then I cut the top half and attached it on, if that makes sense. So this is actually 2 halves joined together, but then I've shortened this length because that's the key difference when you see it there. So again, that's pretty close, and I've tried to measure it off this photo based on the size of the model. So hopefully when that's on that scale will look about right, same that I had to do with the rear tricolor thing there. So yes, so those are all done now on Word. I'll then probably try and print them on actual waterslide decal for this model so they're nice and crisp. But because it's on Word, I can also put it onto tissue paper if they don't work out very well. So they're all ready to go. I'm going to try something a bit different with this kit. Normally I brush on the Easy Dope and I don't water it down. It gets a nice good finish, but you run the risk sometimes of it popping through the paper if it gets too damp. Apparently you can spray it. Not quite sure whether it's through airbrush or through a bottle spray. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try airbrushing it on. It should be quicker, less risk of putting the brush through the paper. Be interested to see, and hopefully it will give a smoother finish as well. So I'm going to try that today, and yeah, see how that goes. Okay, I'm using Easy Dope. I've mixed a 50-50 mixture, so this is it. It seems nice and running but not too thick, so I don't want it to clog up the airbrush. I'm assuming that once I've sprayed it I'll have to clean the airbrush quite quickly. So I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. And the airbrush ready. So fingers crossed I don't ruin the airbrush itself. I'll start at the tail and then work my way back. It's a very fine mist, you can hardly see it going on. Be interesting to see how this takes or how it looks when it's finished. You can definitely feel that there's dope in there because it's a bit sticky on the fingers. Okay, that's the whole frame covered on that initial coat. I think I'm just going to let that dry just to see what happens. I'm going to go and clean the airbrush now. Okay, I've just been and cleaned the airbrush with warm water so that the dope doesn't dry inside it. Already the tissue is tightening nicely. I've got a nice finish. Obviously it will dry out. I need to leave it to dry properly. Get rid of those wrinkles there, but already at the front it's drying out nicely. I will give it another covering, and what I'll also do is using brush I'll apply dope to just tidy up the edges where the tissue paper could be neater, in the same way I've cut it, just to make sure the tissue stays down, fixed down. But yeah, so far that seems like that worked quite nicely. But yeah, I'll do the seams as well with the brush just to glue all of that in place. Right, the sprayed on dope mixture has had time to dry, and to be honest I'm pretty happy with how it's come up. I've got none of the air bubble bits that I have. There's no risk of tearing the paper. Yes, I need to go over it again with another coat just to try and catch those bits that I've missed or that have not shrunk enough, such as underneath here. But yeah, what I also have done as well, I've painted with a brush where all the seams are of the tissue, all the overlaps, with neat Easy Dope just to stick it all down, make sure it stays affixed to the model. So down the edges there, and then along the top, along the bottom I've also gone around the edges, leading edges, just to try and tidy up any loose tissue from where it had cut. So yeah, so I'm now going to apply another spray coat.